My name is Guha. I'm at Kriya University, and I want to thank ISEB for giving me this opportunity, and especially thank Gitanjali. She's done an amazing job getting everyone together, and the organization has been amazing, and her whole team. So it's a pleasure to be here. It's also my pleasure to introduce Manjari Jain. Manjari is at IISER Mohali. She works in the ecology and evolution of mainly animal communication systems. So she uses a whole diverse set of model systems to look at how sexual selection, habitat, and other factors affect the signal evolution in these animal systems. She's also been doing a lot of really interesting work on using these acoustic systems to monitor biodiversity and behavior in wild communities, and that's a very cool area that I'm using. So she's going to be talking about complexity and language like efficiency in the vocalization of a social passerine. Manjari, please.
Thanks Guha. I just want to first thank everybody here in the organizing committee of ISEB 5. It is fantastic. After 2019, ISEB in Bangalore, this is the ISEB I'm attending, and this is fantastic. At the same time, I also want to thank members of my lab who have contributed to most of the work that I'll present, and IISER Mohali for funding, generous infrastructural support, and nice colleagues who keep us all happy by and large, mentors and well-wishers. So thank you everybody. I have been working on primarily looking at how various factors affect signal evolution, and the signals of interest for me are acoustic signals. So I study acoustically communicating animals, and primarily for almost 10 years I studied only crickets and examined multiple factors that may affect their signaling behavior as well as signal structure from the evolutionary point of view. So one, I looked at how habitat might affect their signaling behavior and signal structure, looking at the effect of biological noise, so masking avoidance, cocktail party problems in the crickets. I have also examined how other factors such as sexual selection, natural selection may be shaping the signals that crickets have. And so basically what I'm trying to say that this is a fantastic model system to examine all kinds of selective forces that shape acoustic signals. I am more recently also looking at what we are doing to these animals with respect to anthropogenic changes. But despite crickets being a fantastic model system to address many of these questions, there is one factor which we know is an important driver of acoustic signal evolution, which is sociality. And for that, cricket is not really a great model system to work with, and that's how I started working with Jungle Babblers after I joined IISER Mohali to understand how social behavior modulates acoustic communication and how acoustic communication modulates sociality, but also to understand how sociality, what effect it might have from the evolutionary point of view on signal evolution, what kind of signals may have evolved which allow social animals to interact with each other, especially from the point of view of information transfer. So that is what I'll be talking about today. So I got interested in this fantastic model system, the Jungle Babbler, and the first thing what we wanted to look at was to of course understand the structure and function of these so-called babbles, primarily coming from the point of view of language evolution. So human language, as we know, is regarded as the most complex form of vocal communication, but when you look at how language is defined, there is no consensus. So we don't really agree completely on what constitutes language, and even so much so that does it have to be acoustic? Can it be gestural is something that people have argued. So Tecumseh, Fitch and others have now proposed that it is probably we are barking up the wrong tree when looking at acoustics, maybe we should look at gestures. But that story set aside, what we all agree upon is definitely language is a system of communication which has vocabulary, so sounds that have some meaning or refer to something, and there is grammar. And if you think about is language unique to humans, well, this is what we have been told, and we understand that there is definitely the complexity of human language seems to be unparalleled in the animal kingdom, but there are many commonalities and several uniqueness each model system has with respect to its communication system. So then we ask the question, so what about linguistic continuity? Did animals have, non-human animals have some proto-language like feature, or is it something that just appeared in early humans? So this is something what this field has really progressed in the last 2 decades or so, but it's not as though it is only now that people have started asking these questions. People have worried about what are the prerequisites for language. So apart from the morphology, descended larynx and lip structure, buccal cavity, but 3 important things to look at when we are talking about prerequisites for ability to have language or proto-language. One is the genetic makeup and the neural makeup to have the genes which support speech production and perception, but also the neural makeup for the same. Convergence with respect to vocal learning. This is not acoustic learning, I am talking about vocal learning, how animals may be learning vocalizations early in their age or maybe throughout their lifetime. And more importantly, relevant to this talk, combinatoriality or the ability to combine sounds. So these 3 things please bear in mind. We all know him. His group along with others were also credited with the FOXP2 gene, which was the first gene which was argued to be relevant to the human's ability to develop language, speech production and things like that. We also know that FOXP2 is not unique to humans, it is present in many vertebrates including birds, cetaceans, so on and so forth. So genetic makeup wise, for this particular, this is known as the language gene, we are not unique per se, so it's there in other animals also. What about neural makeup? So Boelhau has worked, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, so he has worked on understanding what may allow certain groups of animals to acquire or may exhibit language-like features, and basically a lot of computational linguistics. What he's argued, and I'll read it for those at the back, that there is increasing evidence for brain homologies between birds and mammals. However, the capability for auditory vocal learning in humans, certain bird species and marine mammals does not seem to be the sole result of common ancestry. Rather, the evidence suggests that there has been evolutionary convergence of the capability of vocal learning, whereby similar selection pressures. So this is where I want to think about it. I don't know whether we will achieve this in our life, in at least my career lifetime. What are the selective pressures which may have driven or allowed certain kind of conditions to occur where language-like abilities animals may have acquired. So were involved in distantly related taxa to solve similar problems. And if you think about the neural makeup, as you all know, there are commonalities between areas in humans and in birds with respect to speech production. We have the Broca's area, birds have the HVC, speech perception, Wernicke's area in humans, and then in case of birds also they have the NCM, the cordomedial nidopallium, very complicated name. So, but there are similar areas found in birds as well as in humans, which allow speech production and perception. So you have the genetic makeup, which is potentially there. Neural makeup, yes, there are commonalities. Now what about the second point, vocal learning? enormous amount of evidence has now come in the last 10 years that many non-human animals are capable of, I mean, birds are very, we know birds that they have vocal learning, all of that is there, but we know that many other animals learn the sound by way of babbling, how humans babble. So how our young ones produce their first infant sounds. So we now know even bats can do this, and other animals produce these kind of sounds which are not quite fully formed, but eventually they start forming these sounds properly by way of babbling. So vocal learning, of course, again, not unique to human, but this is where the deal is completely in favor of humans. So the ability to combine sounds can happen in two ways. So one is phonology, which is simply ordering of sounds, where the sound itself need not be meaningful. So for instance, sa re ga ma pa dha ni sa re ga doesn't mean anything, but sa re re ga ga. So you can combine them and make these ragas, and these higher order structures also need not be meaningful. So that would be phonology. Composition, on the other hand, requires that the constituent elements must mean something, and then you combine elements which already mean something to form higher order meaningful structure. Just the way I am speaking, so you have words which combine to form sentences. Now this kind of structuring is something that is very complex in human, all kinds of human languages, and the ability, the hierarchical structure, recursive nature, dependency is extremely complex, and therefore undeniably, from our current understanding, absolutely there is no comparison. So humans are definitely unique with the ability to do all of this. But we ask the question, can other animals also show, well, phonology? We know phonology is not very, it's not uncommon, but can this show composition is the kind of question we are asking. Okay, so long story cut short, not cut short, I have taken quite some time. 4 minutes over, okay. So when we talk about complexity in communication, there are multiple traits that you can measure. Variety is one measure of complexity. So you can have different kinds of sound that the bird is producing. That is one measure of complexity. Semantics. Do these words mean something? Okay. For a very long time, animal communication was thought of as physiological or arousal state vocalization, that they are signaling hunger or fear. But now we know that's not the case. They can refer to objects, situations, contexts. So there is semantics. Now the third part, of course, is syntax. So this is what we were talking about, phonological syntax. So say for instance, bat, rat, cat, they sound similar, but each one has a different meaning. But bat is composed of three sounds, b, and if you combine b, t in a certain order, different kinds of higher order structures are formed. So these two are meaningful, but this is not meaningful. Okay, but even this can happen in many animals where the higher order structure is not meaningful. This is phonology. Distinct from that, man has its own meaning, drive, car. When you combine these, it forms a higher order structure. This is composition. So the constituent elements themselves being meaningful is the main thing that we are going to ask. Phonology, like I said, is very common, especially in birds. Peter Marler talked about, in fact, greatly talked about how ordering of the elements happen in many songbirds. So we have worked on the purple sunbird all over northwestern India, and we find that, of course, there is phonology, there is ordering of elements of their song. So let me walk you through this plot. This is just a heat map to show each of these are elements of the song of the purple sunbird. And these are the positions of the song phrase. So does the element come in the beginning, or does it come in the middle, or does it come towards the end? So positional fidelity is what we are looking at. Of course, we are also looking at ordering. And yes, there is positional fidelity, which means certain kinds of sounds only occur in the beginning of that phrase. So you can think of how many words can you think of that end with a Q. But how many can we think of that start with a Q? So such kind of things, so positional fidelity. And we've also looked at transition matrices, looking at what are first order transition, whether there is a hidden, whether it's a Markov chain. No, it is not. But this is all phonology, because these sounds themselves are not meaningful. And this is very common in, especially in birds. But this is where the hero of the story comes, jungle babbler, social species, cooperatively breeding, extremely modest to look at, not a fancy bird that you would want to work on, sounds like babble but does not babble. It is found everywhere in India. After working for my PhD in Kudramukh, where I would be stuck outside the forest for forest department permits, I decided I want to work on a model system that can be found anywhere, and that's what we did. So we started working on jungle babblers. We are banding these birds for the last several years. Over 10 years, we have got a rich repertoire of behaviors that we have studied for these birds. We know what they do all day, when they do what they do, so on and so forth. Since they are sexually monomorphic, we have been sexing them using a drop of their blood. So they give us blood and we give them freedom. We release them from the mist net immediately after we collect blood. All the bongs here will understand why I said this. So, and we have been following these birds manually, not by GPS trackers, simply because we are very poor and it is very hard to track sufficient number of birds. So we just follow the group. We have enough individuals banded in the group, and we follow the group, and we now know each group where they operate, not only within a year, across multiple years. So we have a rich data set of behavioral and ecological data from the jungle babblers, the kinds of behaviors they show, but also the kinds of sounds they produce. This is the repertoire of the adult, of the jungle babbler, where you can see there are different kinds of babble-like sounds. These, we looked at these sounds, we annotated, we measured all their acoustic features, and we looked at the behavior, conducted playback experiments in the field, and now we know that the jungle babbler was never found in jungles, but it also does not babble. These are meaningful vocalizations that mean specific things. So for instance, they have the contact call, the first call, it's a monosyllabic call, which the animals will produce when they get separated from the group, and then they call back and they kind of sort of come back together. There are alert calls, there are distress calls, there is a threat call, so on and so forth. So different kinds of calls which are structurally different but also functionally different. So not only there is structural complexity in their vocalization, there is functional complexity. So that one, we also know, well, more of the same thing. So basically we've looked at it very carefully, and we assure you they are both structurally and functionally distinct, these calls. We also found that calls which are produced in similar behavioral contexts are more close structurally also. So this is Morton's motivational structural rule. I have only 5 minutes. Forget about this. I'll go to the next one. So yeah, it's very nice. They produce all kinds of fantastic calls. We know that the calls are also composed of different kinds of elements, and sometimes of the same element. Here, as you can see, repetition of the same element. Okay, so we asked, is there compositional syntax? So we took the alert call vocalizations of the jungle babbler, which is composed of 4 elements, A1, A2, A3, A4. And we started to look at first basic thing, simplest thing, is there ordering? So yes, there is ordering. This is how the calls always come. So the note A1 always precedes A2, A2 comes before A3, so on and so forth. But sometimes they skip some of the notes, okay? So A1 can be followed by A3 or even directly by A4. The reverse never happens, okay? So we ask the simple question, why? What happens if you reverse the call? This is what we did. I hope everybody remembers this movie. We did the red drum experiments. Basically, we flipped the call. If you haven't seen this movie, you must see. Please go back wherever you have Wi-Fi. Look at this movie. It's fantastic. We took the natural calls of the jungle babbler. We flipped it, controlled for the flipping, and we asked what happens. Can they interpret it, or do they misinterpret the alert call? Now remember, this is the alert call, which is likely to be very important for these birds. We also asked, what are these different notes? A1, A2, A3, A4 usually are sort of, produced together, but and they also are distinctly different with respect to the internote intervals between A1 and A2, A3, A4. So we asked what information is encoded in A1 and what information is encoded in A2, A3, A4. So we did behavioral experiments with synthetic stimuli, look at the proportion of birds that responded and the latency of the response and the nature of response. So what do we find? Basically, when you flip the call, the proportion of the group that respond does not change. Okay, so flipping has no effect on how many birds will respond, but it increases the latency almost by double. Now that for an alert call is a severe problem for the bird. If you are going to react to an alert call after 10 seconds, then it's a problem. So while they do respond, but ordering does seem to slow them down, change in the ordering does seem to slow them down. So yes, there is an effect. Then we asked, if we play back only A1 or if we play back only A2, what happens? The proportion of birds that respond changes. So if you are playing A2, A3, A4, almost the entire group is likely to come towards the speaker, whereas for A1 that is not the case. Latency wise they are no different. But A1 when you produce, what happens is, and this never happens for A2, A3, A4, when we play back A1 calls, the birds show a startled response where they get scared. When they have alert call vocalizations, the birds do not show a startled response, but in case of this, of course, they show a startled response. Okay, so that's the startled response where they kind of buckle down or sometimes even fly off. So we asked, what is the startled response? We already have a call which looks very similar to the A1 note. This is a threat call, and when we were doing all these analysis, we realized that the threat call is almost nearly identical to the A1 note except for the duration. So basically the A1 note is telling the bird there is danger, immediate danger, okay, and it is actually there in the vocal repertoire of the jungle babbler itself. So the threat call already exists, and A2, A3, A4 is basically recruiting the group towards where the threat is. What do the birds do when we have the natural alert call? They basically approach the signaler which is making this call, and oftentimes results in mobbing of the predator. So basically what is happening is A2, A3, A4 seems to be the recruitment call in a non-predatory context because they don't show the startle response, but A1 shows, playback of A1 is definitely an immediate danger. So the notice is basically threat plus recruitment call gives you the alert call. There is a predator, gather around. We don't startle, we don't see startle response when there's an alert call vocalization. Instead, they actually start fluffing their wings and they start to approach the predator. Okay, so this is what we think is evidence for compositional syntax, and this has actually also been found in some other groups of babblers just a few years before us, but yeah, they have found it. Okay, very quickly, last, we want to also examine, I'm out of time, 20 minutes or 25 minutes over? 25 minutes. Okay, I'll cut down on questions. You ask me questions during lunch. So, we wanted to look at efficiency of information transfer, and this is determined by Zipf's law of brevity and Mansbridge-Altman law. Very quickly, I'll tell you what this is. Basically, Zipf's law says that shorter elements are likely to be more frequent. So, okay, now that was really cruel. Yeah, so Zipf's law of brevity says that shorter elements should be used more frequently, and Mansbridge-Altman law basically says if you have a large vocal sequence, it should be composed of shorter elements. If you have a small vocal sequence, then the larger elements are likely to occur. And this is true. This has been tested in multiple languages, in humans, all kinds of languages, and it is true. This is upheld. what we did was to examine this in the alert call vocalizations of Jungle Babbler. This is what the alert call looks like. So it has 2-note vocalizations, it has 3-note vocalization, it also has 4-note vocalization. So we asked which one is more common. Of course, call sequences that are shorter were far more common than the longer call sequence and follows the inverse power law, which is what the Zipf's law predicts. So yes, we find evidence for Zipf's law in the alert call vocalization of Jungle Babbler, and we also find evidence for Menz-Rith law, where A1, which is the biggest note, seems to occur most frequently in short sequences and least frequently in longer sequence, and the vice versa for A4, which is the shortest note. So basically what we have found is, we have found variety, we have found semantics, we have found syntax in the vocalization of Jungle Babbler, and we have also found evidence for both linguistic, both the laws, Zipf's law as well as Menz-Rith law, which has been proposed to enhance information transfer, also which could be driven by production efficiency. Okay, so this all of this we have found. This is the work of my former PhD students Sonam and Sonia. Both have moved on to look at the neurobiological basis of bird song, and this is my lab, and thank you all for listening.